Students of Read It. What's the story of the worst teacher you've ever had? Story 1. I was in 6th grade and was being bullied from day one, like seriously obvious stuff like being kicked under the table or being pulled down by my backpack. So I did as I was told many times to get a teacher, tell them and they will handle it. That never happened. They always never saw it so they couldn't do anything about it sort of scenario. Even though some of this stuff happened right in front of them, they just didn't want to deal with it. So one day I'm having a particularly bad day of being bullied. The bully this time hit me in the side with a pencil and scribbled on my paper before walking up to the teacher's desk to turn in his work. I got my revenge. I followed him up to the desk with an unfolded stapler and just went to town on him before I got pulled off. Immediate expulsion. I am so incredibly lucky my parents were on my side of this because I pretty much knew I was on some deep mess over this. Zero punishment, moved to a different school with zero other problems caused by the rest of my K-12 school career. Stapled my hand once as a kid, and it hurt like hell. Story 2. Oh, let's see. This teacher threw a chair at a student, nearly threw a desk at a student, threw his keys at a student, threw chalk at students. Hard. Didn't believe that I could read chapter books. In grade 5, as a 10-year-old, we were learning about pH values and tested bleach. It came out as a base because it is a base. He was surprised and told us it must have changed from being an acid because it had been sitting on the shelf for so long. Made a kid do detention in the hall with a sign that said, "Future Squeegee Kid." It was all around a pretty poor teacher with a terrible temper. Maybe he would have done better in high school when classroom management is a little easier. Middle school? Not so much. I forgot another terrible teacher. The subject was high school French. The subjects we covered were his favorite hockey team, his favorite hockey player, the miseries inflicted upon him by his wife, and how terrible behaved the students at his previous school were. All of this was in English. We didn't learn a lick of French that year, and the administration couldn't figure out why everyone kept dropping out of the French program after taking his class. Story 3. Teachers are incredibly weird about letting kids go to the nurse and bathroom. I've heard of high school kids being denied bathroom access despite being close to adulthood, or are adults in some cases. It's weird that a high school senior may be able to vote and serve in the army but can't use the bathroom without getting permission. My son has severe peanut and egg allergies. His school wasn't nut or egg free and served both for breakfast and lunch. They had a tiny nut-free table, but only kids with allergies could eat there, and my son is incredibly social and never sat there because he wanted to eat with his friends. I told him it was dumb, but it wasn't my decision. He's the one who has to live with his allergies. He ended up accidentally consuming something containing his allergen and started feeling like he was going to go into anaphylaxis, so he got up and went to tell the teachers so he could get his EpiPen. She told him to sit down because it was 5 minutes before they had to leave and no one was allowed to get up at the time for some reason that I don't understand. He ended up going into anaphylaxis. She fortunately had the EpiPen on hand and was able to treat him, but he still had to go to the hospital. That wasn't a fun call. The teacher wasn't fired, but we ended up transferring our kids out of that school for unrelated reasons. It was a good decision. Story 4. I'm not sure this qualifies. I liked reading from an early age and was excited to learn literature in junior high. I had a teacher who just completed her postgrad diploma and for an entire year in literature class, she would just flip pages and say things such as, "Turn to page 88, highlight paragraph 3. That's going to be tested." One day she had to make up a class on Saturday and started telling us how much she hated her job and she couldn't go get buzzed on Friday night because she had to show up on a Saturday morning and teach a bunch of stinking kids. She then proceeded to ask us to turn to some page and yell, "Just highlight everything. The entire page will be tested." She got fired because she got caught getting it on with the IT instructor in the computer lab. Okay, while she sounds horrible, to be fair, it's kind of BS that they made her make up a class on a Saturday. Story 5. I remember having this awful English teacher in 5th grade. First of all, in my country, no one speaks English properly, so we had 2 English books, literature and grammar. I used to love reading a lot. My grammar was pretty good. So when she would be solving a particular page with us, I would be on the other 3 pages and wait for the teacher to come to my page to check my answers. One day she saw me not writing and asked me why I was not writing, to which I replied I had already finished, so she asked me to erase all of the 3 pages and solve at her pace. Not only that, but the worst part was we had a very difficult lesson in literature once and we had questions on that the next day. When I submitted my book, she outright said that my parents had done it for me. It kept on going like this, until once during a test she accused me of copying, and when I told her that I would be happy to take the test again in front of her, she told me I was arguing. When she took me to the principal's room to take another test, she gave me the toughest paper for a 5th grader, but anyhow, I got an 18 out of 20 on my test and finally believed that I didn't cheat. Story 6. Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest. Mr. Pratt, he was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s. Inner city school, he was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of a-hole students though, who always mouthed back to every teacher, which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed but definitely ghetto-sounding substitute when a student tried to act out would pull a puppet, obviously custom-made and looked just like him, suit and all out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy, by the way. It would make the student talk to the puppet and apologize. Most didn't. They were laughing and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of the class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer and Mr. Pratt continued. It was odd. Imagining that puppet scenario but with a ghetto dude doing a high voice just makes this hilarious.
Oh my God, what is that?
If you two are asking what that is, it's the sponsor of today's video, Rufus Rugs. We've been hard at work, creating the best quality and premium hand-tufted rugs money can buy. Now there's a chance you own a carpet that looks something like this. Let's just be real, it's time for an upgrade. And luckily for you, me and the boys from Rufus Rugs are at your service. We don't make those average cheap quality looking rugs. Nope, not gonna happen. Each one is handcrafted to perfection. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life.
Story 7. I've had so many teachers who were absolutely terrible at their jobs and didn't view their students as people, just burdens. One teacher got angry at me for asking if I could sit in the front of the class because I have poor eyesight, and it helps me to be able to see. Another teacher said, whatever, when I corrected them on how to pronounce my name. I had a science teacher tell the class the US Constitution was based on Christianity and stopping pregnancy is evil. This was physical science. She also said global warming wasn't real, and communist China is evil. The list goes on. One teacher screamed at my friend about the length of her fingernails. They weren't particularly long. There was a security guard in my school who would send me to the office every day for dress code violations, even if I wasn't violating the dress code, to the point where I gave up and just wore whatever I wanted. She targeted me in particular, but she hated all the queer, goth, or black students. All the popular kids who also broke the dress code she said nothing to. The list goes on. Long story short, public school is hell and it's a deeply flawed institution. I'm really happy seeing kids these days actually fight back. Story 8. I was part of a 2-year program in grade 9 in which I took a few classes together in sequence and did a project at the end of each year. It was near the end of the year and the project was underway. We were made up of groups from years 1 and 2 of the program, so freshmen and sophomores worked together. I was sick for a week and went to the teacher, let's call her Mrs. Module, of the year 2 students for information about what I missed because she was in charge of the project. She told me it was on her teacher page and I thanked her and left. The next day, I got a bunch of texts from the sophomores and juniors that Miss Module had complained about me by name, saying I wasn't afraid of her and was a disrespectful student for not checking the website first and asking her before school. She really hurt my feelings and hurt the way my peers view me as a person. She then did it again the next year, this time telling a class of sophomores about how I was terrible at presenting and got a poor grade, something which was false. I got a 92. I then noticed she set the Google Classroom we used for handing things in to automatically share every document we produced in class, along with our scores on those works with a woman in Arkansas named Jody. I asked her about it and she told me to tell nobody. I asked my friend if he saw it and she overheard me. She threatened to send me to a week of detention if I told anyone else, because she was obviously violating FERPA, New York State ed policy, and our district's policy. The next week, I took my midterm and failed. 63%, lowest out of 60 students in our class. I've never gotten less than a 94 in midterms or finals or any English test. I asked to see it. She just gave me an old Regents test which any English teacher could grade because I wanted a second opinion. Apparently, she throws them out after grading. Sorry that was long, I just wanted to say something. Story 9. The worst teacher I ever had was my shop teacher or gym teacher in high school. He would not do anything at all. I was able to smoke in shop class and in gym class as long as it was outside running laps or something. I never once heard him tell anyone about safety measures when using shop equipment. A few people got hurt and one actually got in an accident, but the worst thing he ever did was hire some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home to check on the kids and was eventually caught with one of them. After a police investigation, they found a ton of homemade stuff in his laptop. Last I heard, he went to jail for life. This was all in a town of less than 300 people. Leave his wife at the bar to check on the kids? Who would buy that? If you could have thought of a better excuse in the moment, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Story 10. 4th grade teacher who led the after-school dance program at my elementary school. She was known for her explosive temper and playing favorites. Her favorites were a group of girls who considered themselves popular. Being invited to their pool parties meant that you were cool. This teacher used to invite these girls for sleepovers at her house. Well, this teacher hated me and I desperately wanted to feel accepted. So one day she was testing the class in the 9 times tables, and the way that the test was set up was that we would have to recite it. Some kids were allowed to be tested in private. I fumbled for whatever reason and started speaking in a low voice out of embarrassment that I was fumbling. I remember her just screaming at me why I don't get anything she teaches. I wasn't allowed to sit back in my seat until she was done screaming. I remember shaking and how scared and humiliated I was. Mixed with the anger and embarrassment, I snapped my reading glasses in half. A couple of days passed and my parents asked me why I'm not wearing my glasses until I burst into tears over what happened. All I knew was that Mom scheduled a meeting and, well, that teacher didn't bother me for the rest of elementary school. Lol. Screw you, Mrs. N. You're a witch and do not belong around children. Story 11. So my 7th grade math teacher. She was 400 pounds and we gave her the nickname of replacing the beginning symbol of her name with fat. For example, Lawrence Fatrance. I'm not staring at her name because she could be on Reddit seeing this, you never know. Every time we would have her class, she would yell at us one way or another, just constantly about anything. One time, she tried to get a kid a referral when he wasn't even in school and homesick. That same kid was also being bullied by every student, basically. Pray for Gabe. She also referred to that kid for being in a bathroom for 2 minutes, claiming it was 15. Most students backed Gabe on this, even though mostly everyone bullied him. Oh, but this isn't the end of it. She had a daughter in the same school as us. The daughter looked like her if she was younger or skinnier. Also cute. The daughter hated the living crap out of her to the point of committing a crime on her. But despite all of this meanness in her, she had a husband that was in the military. Story 12. When I was in 7th grade, I had this teacher who was the worst teacher I could possibly imagine. Let's call her Miss Gale. Number 1, Miss Gale would promote her book every 2 minutes. Number 2, speaking of the book, it was awfully explicit for middle schoolers. For example, a chapter of the novel explained how badly one of the characters wanted to get with a girl in a school. Not to mention the book was about 14-year-olds. Number 3, she desperately wanted to be popular out of all the teachers. For instance, once she went up to a guy who was the alpha male in our school, she deadbeat stared at his eyes for 2 minutes straight. She then gave him the most terrifying grin and said, "Wow, you're popular." Miss Gale scared the day-living crap out of the kid and he rarely spoke to her in class. Number 4, one day she was giving a presentation in class and said some unnecessary stuff about the deed. One kid muttered, "Man, what the hell?" Miss Gale rotated her head like the girl from The Exorcist and dragged him out of class. He got detention for a week. No consequences for her. Number 5, I had a tall, dim-witted but gentle friend in my grade. Let's call her Theodora. Theodora had Miss Gale as her advisory teacher. One day she was late for advisory and she had a late pass with her from history. Miss Gale gave her a cold stare and tore her late pass in half. She gave Theodora detention for being late, although once again she had a late pass. Well, things did not turn out well for Theo, as she was bawling her eyes in front of the whole class. Miss Gale, as the evil witch she was, called her out for being crybaby. Theo's mother later called the old hag, saying it was a ridiculous reason why Theo received detention. Miss Gale got no consequences whatsoever. Number 6, Miss Gale purposely gave Fs to the people she hated in the class, but gave As to the popular ones in our school. Number 7, she humiliated multiple kids for their looks and once called out a kid for looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Number 8, she gave a kid an F for plagiarism for one of the book reports. He only quoted the section of the passage for evidence. Number 9, gave detention to a kid who said Jesus Christ and called him out for being anti-Semitic. Number 10, once there was a debate between 2 loudmouths in our school in which they argued about who was the hottest girl in the school. Miss Gale got involved and said, "At least I don't have my V card like her." The 2 never talked beside her for the rest of the year. Number 11, she was a terrible teacher. She never explained the concepts and gave us freaking worksheets without any hints or clues. Number 12, rumor has it that she worked at a Catholic school and she started punishing the students for illogical reasons. She then told the kids to go to hell over a debate about if Andrew Jackson was an innocent man. She got fired. I can't believe she's still a teacher. To those doing research on my former teacher, I decided that I should delete the title of her book and keep her out of the public by naming her. So don't assume that Miss Gale is a real name. Oh, here's a bonus. Once we were reading The Outsider's book and she was directing a presentation about what would be in it and so on and so forth. It was going well until one of our terms was bull session. She explained how bull session meant BSing. Now I understand it's important to explain the terms used in The Outsiders, but this lady gargled the actual word every time she got the chance to. This continued until one of the neighboring classrooms walked in the middle of her swearing session since it was getting extremely loud. She blamed the other students for using foul language. After that, she moved on to her presentation about famous figures in The Outsider's book, ranting about how one of her students didn't know who the Beatles were and yada yada yada. Now that's what I call BS. Story 13. When I was in 1st grade, there was an infamous substitute teacher in my school region. Mr. Hunter, he was called. His name was hissed under breaths and passed on from student to student between schools. Heavens help you if you got this grizzled, hunched old walnut that was occasionally pulled out of retirement to bestow his tyranny upon innocent children. But I was young, foolish, I didn't believe the stories my siblings told me. And so, being the cutesy teacher's pet I was, I put on my brightest smile the moment he walked in my 1st grade classroom and chimed, "Good morning, Mr. Hunter," with the rest of the class. "Huh," he said, or something like that. A displeased, non-committal noise. It only went worse from there. A quick side note, I have a name that is one of those names that can be pronounced in different ways. Let's say my name was Kiara and pronounced Kiara instead of Kira. I'm used to getting it spoken wrong by substitute teachers at this point, so I have no problem politely correcting teachers. Mr. Hunter got my name in the attendance. "Kira," he said. "Oh, Mr. Hunter, sir, it's actually Kiara." I corrected in a chirp. All hell broke loose. This absolute a-hole of a geezer lowered the attendance board and started shouting at little tiny me, telling me that because he was the adult and I was the child, he knew better than I did. Obviously, my parents pronounced my name wrong, and obviously, I was too thick to realize it. He told me it was rude to have corrected him, and for the rest of the day, he called me by the wrong name. So yeah, screw that guy. Real-life Key and Peele. Aaron would be terrified. Story 14. Ever had a teacher that hated their job with their entire being? Well, that would describe Mrs. S quite well. She was a college professor during the summer and a middle school geography teacher for the other 3 seasons. I had her in middle school. On her first day of school, she handed out a 10-page syllabus of just rules. This ranged from basic stuff such as don't cuss and turn in your stuff on time to weird stuff like don't talk without her permission. She took that silence rule very seriously. She hated any noise. She would rarely talk and never give any sort of lessons in front of the class. We would walk in and there would be a tray with our work for the day, and then we would have to take our textbooks out of our bag. No class set, her choice to promote student accountability, and just sit at our desks and fill in everything on the Scantron that came with it. We did this until the administration came into the room, then all of a sudden, she was just up in front of the class, being fun and interesting, showing us songs to help remember countries. One time she slapped a kid in the face because he was asking another student for help, and she heard him talk. Any sort of noise was banned. Story 15. In second grade, my class was reading Treasure Island. I freaking fell in love with that stuff. And pirates in general. I've got books and books about pirates now. Anyways, I loved the book so much that I, brace yourselves here, read ahead of the class. That's right, I committed the awful crime of wanting to find out what happens next. My teacher found out about 2 weeks into the book when she caught me reading during lunch and I was like half the book ahead of the class. She proceeded to throw a giant hissy fit, said I was cheating, and called my mom in for a parent-teacher conference. This was not my first parent-teacher conference with this teacher. I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't get into any fights, but I did love to climb things and find quiet places to be alone. So I climbed onto the roof via a drain pipe or climbed on top of one of those old-fashioned portable classrooms several times. I was fine but kept getting in trouble because the school kept thinking I was going to fall and get in an accident. In their defense, looking back on it, I can understand why. Back to the point. My mom comes into the conference upset and scared and already telling me off and to stop climbing, and I told her that I didn't do anything. My teacher explained what I did wrong. And my mom was confused at first, then angry. You called me out of work because my son wants to read a book? Good. My mom got upset for a few minutes, then just laughed it off. She basically told the teacher where to stuff it, then took me to Burger King. Screw you, Mrs. Hamilton. All I wanted was to read about cool pirates. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Why did your teacher get fired? Story 3 was messed up. See you in that video.